Chapter 1. The Shattered Stillness at Crystal Sands. The Crystal Sands Hotel, perched on the windswept cliffs above Dorset's restless sea, glittered in the sunlight like a vision from a fever dream. Whitewashed walls and delicate arches promised a retreat from the world's troubles, a place of exquisite luxury where time slowed to the hush of surf on sand. On this golden June morning, however, a sharp, unnatural chill had settled in the air, and the tranquility of the hotel's celebrated terrace was about to splinter. It began with laughter, light, rehearsed, expensive, echoing among the marble columns. Sir Charles Lytton, a magnate with a taste for display, presided over a breakfast table heaped with strawberries and silver. His wife, the much younger and dazzlingly cold Lady Miranda, glimmered in blue silk. Beyond them sat their daughter Evelyn, pale and silent, eyes hidden behind tinted glasses. There was a hum of speculation about her health, as there always seemed to be. The guests assembled for this particular weekend were as carefully curated as the floral arrangements. Dr. Felix Grantham, a brooding medical researcher, Miss Lenora Bray, an anxious heiress, Julian Standish, a promising young playwright with debts in every pocket, and Mrs. Ursula Devon, a widow with a sharp tongue and an endless wardrobe of black. The staff, too, were hand-picked, impeccably trained, invisible when not needed. Yet as the first wave of breakfast conversation crested and fell, the atmosphere was pricked by a series of tiny, unsettling incidents. A dropped napkin, an uncharacteristically late tray of scones, the brief appearance of the housekeeper, Mrs. Castle, looking more drawn than usual. None of these alone would have mattered, but together they built a sense of tension, something just out of view waiting to surface. At precisely 9:45, the hush was torn by a shriek, raw, guttural, wholly out of place amid the cultivated calm. It came from the east wing, near the private suites. Chairs scraped, silverware clattered. Lady Miranda turned a shade paler, and Sir Charles rose, a heavy frown knotted between his brows. The source of the scream was quickly found. A chambermaid, eyes wide and hands trembling, had stumbled into the corridor outside the Amethyst suite and glimpsed something so disturbing that words failed her. Guests crowded the hall, murmurs rising and falling like the tide. Julian Standish, ever eager for drama, tried to peer inside. But it was Sir Charles who, with a trembling hand, opened the door fully. The Amethyst suite, renowned for its sumptuous furnishings and panoramic view, now bore the stamp of horror. On the Persian rug lay the body of an older gentleman, Mr. Harold de Vries, a discreet Dutch diamond broker known for his meticulous habits and his understated charm. He had arrived only the night before, his presence the subject of much speculation, for it was rumoured he had come to broker a quiet but lucrative transaction involving a rare blue diamond said to have belonged to a Russian princess. Now, de Vries lay sprawled beside the open French doors, his dressing gown streaked with blood, a single crystalline glass shard embedded in his neck. The tray of coffee he had ordered was smashed upon the floor, the silver pot leaking its dark stain into the pale carpet. Sir Charles gasped, the colour draining from his face. Lady Miranda pressed a hand to her mouth. Evelyn, her expression unreadable, turned away, clutching her arms to her chest. The other guests lingered in the hall, half shielded by the door, hungry for every gruesome detail. In the first confusion, nothing made sense. The suite was locked from the inside. The only possible exit, a narrow balcony, overlooked a deadly drop to the rocky beach below. No footprints in the sand, no signs of forced entry, no note, no weapon save the glass itself. Already whispers filled the hall. Suicide, an accident, a crime of passion. But the sense of dread was overpowering. A single, unspeakable act had broken the hotel's fragile spell, and beneath it all, the unmistakable, invisible tremor of secrets waiting to burst forth. By the time the police arrived, the sun had vanished behind a slate-colored cloud. No one could remember when the air had grown so cold. A disturbance, indeed, had come to Crystal Sands, and its ripples would soon spread far beyond the walls of the hotel. Chapter 2. The First Clues. By mid-morning, the Crystal Sands Hotel had shed its air of easy leisure. Guests clustered in nervous little knots, voices kept low, eyes darting toward the closed doors of the Amethyst Suite. The local constabulary arrived, a pair of uniformed officers led by Inspector Larch, a lean man whose calm country barely hid his discomfort at the opulent surroundings. He moved through the rooms with careful steps, his notebook ready, his gaze never missing a thing. The suite itself was already transforming from a scene of luxury into a landscape of suspicion. The body of Mr. de Vries remained untouched, Inspector Larch ordering that nothing be disturbed until a medical examiner could confirm the time and cause of death. The guests were asked to remain in the lounge, but several lingered at the threshold, whispering behind gloved hands. Larch examined the French doors first. They stood open, the gauzy curtains drifting in the salty breeze, but the balcony was narrow and treacherous. He leaned out, squinting. The sand below was smooth, no sign that anyone had climbed up or down. He jotted a note, then tested the door's lock. It functioned perfectly. Returning inside, Larch crouched near the body. The glass shard glimmered like a malevolent jewel against de Vries's pale throat. A quick survey of the shattered coffee tray revealed only one cup, unbroken and still half full, as if de Vries had not yet had his morning sip. The sugar tongs had landed by the fireplace, oddly far from the rest of the debris. He stood, glancing at the ornate clock on the mantel. It had stopped at 9:48, 3 minutes after the scream. Odd, since it was wound every morning by Mrs. Castle, the housekeeper, known for her precision. Larch made another note. He moved to the writing desk where de Vries's leather portfolio sat open. Documents were neatly stacked, except for a single missing page, the torn edge fluttering as if ripped hastily. The inkwell was tipped, a small puddle staining the blotter, and a fountain pen rolled toward the floor. No letter, no note, nothing that hinted at intent or explanation. From the bedroom, a faint scent of lilacs lingered, clashing with the bitter tang of coffee and blood. On the bedside table, 2 glasses, one for water, one for whiskey, stood untouched. Larch frowned. He bent to examine the wastebasket. Among the crumpled tissues and an envelope addressed to Sir Charles was a small, folded scrap of blue paper. On it, a half-written phrase, "If anything should happen to me," and nothing more. Outside in the lounge, the guests' agitation grew. Sir Charles insisted on recounting every step he'd taken that morning. "I was on the terrace with my wife," he repeated, voice rising. "Ask anyone. I never left her side." Lady Miranda's gaze drifted, unfocused, as she nodded agreement. Evelyn remained silent, her pale fingers tracing the rim of her teacup. Miss Bray claimed she had been in the garden with Mrs. Devon, but when questioned separately, each gave a slightly different version of events. Dr. Grantham hovered near the door, eyes fixed on the floor, insisting he was writing letters in his room. Julian Standish, with theatrical sorrow, said he had been rehearsing lines in the drawing-room, alone. Already, inconsistencies were surfacing. The chambermaid insisted the Amethyst Suite had been locked when she approached, but Mrs. Castle contradicted her, swearing she had unlocked it herself after hearing a crash. Sir Charles bristled at this, casting sidelong glances at the housekeeper. The tension thickened, alliances shifting in small, silent ways. Inspector Larch gathered their statements, his questions circling back, always gentle, always pressing. Red herrings sprouted everywhere, a missing page, a stopped clock, a glass shard that seemed too conveniently placed. The sense of something concealed, some truth just beyond reach, pressed in on everyone present. Through it all, the sound of the sea was constant, a muted reminder that here, at Crystal Sands, even the tide kept secrets. Chapter 3. The Gathering of Suspects. Inspector Larch, determined to impose order on confusion, requested all guests and staff assemble in the main salon. The Crystal Sands grand room, with its tall windows and faded murals, became a stage set for suspicion. Chairs were arranged in a loose circle, and the air grew heavy with the mingled scents of sea salt and fear. Sir Charles Lytton, struggling to maintain authority, stood apart, his fists clenched. Lady Miranda's posture was rigid, her face carefully composed, save for the slightest tremor at her jaw. Evelyn, ghostly and silent, took a seat by the window, her gaze fixed on the horizon, refusing to meet anyone's eyes. Miss Lenora Bray fidgeted, hands twisting a handkerchief as she cast wary glances around the room. Her voice, when she spoke, was thin and uncertain. "I don't understand how such a thing could happen here. Mr. de Vries seemed so gentle." Her words hung in the air, half plea, half denial. Julian Standish lounged in his chair, feigning nonchalance, but his restless foot tapped a nervous rhythm on the floorboards. He avoided Inspector Larch's gaze, instead directing occasional, oddly sharp looks toward Evelyn and Dr. Grantham. Mrs. Ursula Devon sat stiffly, her morning attire immaculate. Her lips curled in silent disapproval as she surveyed her companions. "Murder, Inspector? In a respectable place like this? You'll find it's always the quiet ones," she said, with a pointed look at the staff. Dr. Felix Grantham, shoulders hunched, seemed absorbed in a medical journal, but his eyes flickered over the room with clinical sharpness. When questioned, he gave precise but guarded answers. "I was in my suite preparing notes for my presentation at St. Jude's Hospital next week. I heard nothing unusual until the scream." Mrs. Castle, the housekeeper, hovered at the edge, eyes reddened. "I only want what's best for this house, sir. Mr. de Vries was quiet, polite. He gave me a tip last night. I can't believe anyone would—" Her words faded, replaced by a nervous cough. The rest of the staff, kitchen maids, the porter, the aging butler, Mr. Hemsley, stood in a cluster near the doors, uncertain whether to speak unless directly addressed. They exchanged glances, their own internal hierarchy unsettled by tragedy. Inspector Larch began his questioning, focusing first on movements that morning. Sir Charles insisted his entire morning was spent on the terrace, emphasizing his own routine and the company of his wife. Lady Miranda agreed, but her answers were vague, her attention seemingly fixed elsewhere. Miss Bray claimed she and Mrs. Devon were walking the garden paths, but Mrs. Devon's version was muddled. "She was distracted, Inspector, picking at the roses as if waiting for something. I was reading by the fountain." Their timelines overlapped but did not quite fit. Julian Standish provided a dramatic account of his solitary rehearsal in the drawing room, describing every creak and shadow as if on a stage. "If only life were as easily scripted as a play, Inspector," he quipped, masking anxiety with wit. Dr. Grantham maintained his alibi with cool certainty, but Mrs. Castle hesitated when asked about the suite's access. "I thought it locked, but perhaps, with all the deliveries and chores, I might have been mistaken. So many keys, Inspector, it's hard to keep track." The atmosphere grew tense as inconsistencies surfaced. A misplaced key, a timeline no one else could confirm, the odd location of the sugar tongs. Evelyn remained quiet throughout, fingers curled tight around the arms of her chair, her silence more eloquent than any protest. As the questioning drew on, subtle tensions crackled, alliances and old grievances flickering beneath polite words. Inspector Larch, notebook filling with contradictions, knew the real answers were hidden, perhaps in what was not said at all. Outside, the tide continued to rise, and with it, so did the unspoken fears of everyone gathered inside. Chapter 4. Poirot arrives. The afternoon sun cast shifting diamonds across the marble floors as a new figure appeared at the entrance to Crystal Sands. His silhouette, unmistakable, short, impeccably dressed, a neat moustache, a hat set at a precise angle. Hercule Poirot, summoned at Sir Charles's urgent request, arrived with an air of calm certainty that seemed to draw all eyes as he crossed the threshold. Poirot paused, surveying the assembled company with a courteous bow. "Messieurs, mesdames," he greeted, voice warm yet quietly commanding. "I am Hercule Poirot. Inspector Larch, I presume?" His gaze found the inspector, and in a moment, Poirot's presence gently but inexorably assumed control. Larch, though wary of surrendering his authority, could not help but respect Poirot's reputation. "Mr. Poirot, we are grateful for your assistance, though I must warn you, this case already confounds us." Poirot smiled gently. "That is often the case with cases of murder, Inspector. They begin in confusion and end, if one is diligent, in clarity. Now, if you please, I would like to see the scene myself, unaccompanied, so that I may think my own little thoughts." With Larch's reluctant permission, Poirot entered the amethyst suite. He took in every detail, pausing to examine the blood-streaked rug, the glittering shard of glass, the broken tray, and the stopped clock. He touched nothing, yet his eyes seemed to linger on minutiae others overlooked, the angle of the coffee-pot, the direction of the drapes, the solitary cup untouched on the sideboard. He inhaled the mingled scents, coffee, lilac, the faint metallic tang of blood. He knelt, studying the position of de Vries' body and the peculiar placement of the sugar tongs by the fireplace. He noted the half-written note and the torn page from the portfolio. As he worked, the silence grew almost sacred, broken only by Poirot's soft humming. After 10 minutes, he re-emerged. The guests, growing restless, watched him with a mixture of curiosity and dread. Poirot's eyes lingered on each face. Sir Charles, striving for composure. Lady Miranda, cold and reserved. Evelyn, shrinking into her chair. Miss Bray, trembling, standish, watchful. Mrs. Devon, defensive. Dr. Grantham, self-contained. Even the staff felt his gaze, Mrs. Castle stiffening, the butler flinching, the maids avoiding his eyes. Poirot addressed the company with impeccable politeness. "Forgive me, but I must ask you all a few questions. Not about where you were, but about what you saw, what you noticed, even if it seemed trivial." His eyes were bright, as if to signal that for him nothing was trivial. He asked Miss Bray about the scent of lilacs in the corridor that morning. She hesitated, then nodded. "I smelled it too. I thought perhaps Lady Miranda passed by. She always wears lilac water." Poirot thanked her, moving on. He questioned Julian Standish about the sounds he heard during his rehearsal. There was a crash, a cup or something dropped, then a shout. But I heard footsteps running too, I cannot say whose. Poirot fixed his gaze on Evelyn. "Mademoiselle, you sat by the terrace after breakfast. Did you see anyone approach the east wing?" Evelyn's hands twisted in her lap. "No, Monsieur Poirot, I heard voices, but I did not look." Poirot nodded, storing the contradiction for later. He asked Sir Charles about the envelope addressed to him in the wastebasket. Sir Charles blinked, then shrugged. I receive so much correspondence. I cannot recall. Perhaps de Vries wanted to speak with me about business." At last, Poirot addressed Inspector Larch, quietly but firmly. "The official theory is suicide or accident, yes? I do not believe it. The details are wrong. The glass, the missing page, the stopped clock. Non, mon ami, this is murder." And the murderer, he let the sentence trail, letting tension settle in the room, "is among us." The guests shuddered, a chill settling in despite the bright afternoon. Poirot's little grey cells were already at work, and no secret would remain hidden for long. Chapter 5. Initial interviews begin. Poirot chose to begin his interviews not with grand pronouncements, but with a gentle, almost casual touch, as if simply indulging in conversation. One by one, the suspects were ushered into the reading room, each encounter private, though all knew they would soon be scrutinized. First came Lady Miranda, gliding in with carefully measured grace. Poirot gestured to the armchair opposite, his manner kindly but searching. "Madame, forgive the intrusion in your hour of distress. Tell me, did you knew Mr. de Vries before his arrival?" She adjusted her bracelet, eyes lowered. "We met only last autumn at a charity gala in London. My husband and he had business interests. I found him courteous but unremarkable." A pause, then a flash of irritation crossed her face. "Charles thought highly of him?" Poirot nodded. "And this morning? Did you see or hear anything out of the ordinary before the incident?" Miranda hesitated, lips pressed tight. "I heard raised voices from the corridor as I returned to my suite. I thought it was a quarrel between the staff. I paid it little mind." Her answer seemed rehearsed, practiced. Next was Sir Charles, entering briskly, jaw set. "This is all a ghastly misunderstanding, Poirot. My wife and I were together. Ask anyone. I barely knew de Vries. He was here to advise on some gemstones, that's all." Poirot's gaze sharpened. "You received a note from him, addressed to you. Do you recall its contents?" Sir Charles bristled. "Nothing important. Some query about his account, perhaps. I left it unopened on my desk. I've hardly had time for business affairs this weekend." But Poirot's silence invited further confession, and at last Sir Charles muttered, "He did mention a valuable stone he wished to appraise, but would say no more." Miss Bray arrived with nervous steps, hands fidgeting. I didn't know Mr. de Vries well. He smiled at me in the lounge last night, but we didn't speak." She glanced anxiously at the windows. "This morning I was with Mrs. Devon in the garden." I promise. Poirot leaned forward, gentle. "And yet, Miss Bray, Mrs. Devon recalls you seemed distracted." A blush. I thought I saw someone watching from the upstairs landing. It frightened me. When I looked again, they were gone." Poirot's eyes gleamed with interest, but he pressed no further. Mrs. Devon entered next, spine stiff. "I resent being questioned, Monsieur Poirot. My morning was spent reading. I saw no one but Lenora, who, as you say, was not herself." Poirot asked her about the quarrel Miss Bray described. Mrs. Devon's mouth tightened. "She imagines things. There was no one else in the garden, no voices I would have heard." Julian Standish appeared in a burst of nervous energy. "You know, Poirot, murder is frightfully inconvenient for a playwright. No one will believe me when I say I was rehearsing alone, but it's true." He offered a crooked smile. "If I'd killed de Vries, I'd at least have given him a clever last line." Poirot smiled faintly. "Humour is sometimes a mask, monsieur. Did you hear anyone pass the drawing-room before the incident?" Standish shrugged. "Just footsteps, quick, light. Could have been Evelyn or a maid. I couldn't see." Dr. Grantham arrived, posture rigid. "You seek medical insight, Monsieur Poirot?" I assure you I had no reason to harm de Vries. I was writing letters for my hospital board. Poirot inquired about his knowledge of poisons, prompting a cold stare. I know many things, but not, I hope, what you imagine. Last came Evelyn, withdrawn and silent. I was on the terrace, she whispered. Listening to the sea, I heard glass break, that's all. Poirot studied her trembling hands, sensing more than she said. When the interviews ended, Poirot sat alone, reflecting. Each account contradicted the next, and beneath every word he sensed the friction of fear, envy, and secrets only just beginning to surface. Chapter 6. First False Lead. That evening, the Crystal Sands Hotel seemed haunted by whispers and speculation. The sunset cast bars of orange across the parquet floors, and as the shadows lengthened, nerves began to fray. Inspector Larch, emboldened by the details gathered, called Poirot to the study with a look of grim satisfaction. "Mr. Poirot, I believe the solution is at hand," Larch declared, gesturing to his notebook. "The evidence points squarely to Dr. Grantham, the quarrel overheard, his knowledge of toxins, and the fact that de Vries's water glass tested positive for traces of digitalis, a potent poison in the right dose." Poirot, seated with hands steepled, regarded Larch with gentle amusement. "You have reason, Inspector, but do you have certainty?" His tone was neither mocking nor dismissive, merely curious. Larch pressed on. Grantham was the last to leave his room before the maid found the body. The digitalis could only have come from a medical source. He had access, and no one else does. The motive? Money, of course. De Vries was rumoured to be involved in lucrative deals at the hospital. Poirot considered this in silence. The pieces on the surface fit well. Too well, perhaps. And yet, he mused, if one were to frame a doctor, what better way than poison? Who else might have known of his supplies? The doctor was summoned to the study, a solitary figure in a shadowed doorway. His expression was composed, but his voice vibrated with anger. "This is preposterous. I've never prescribed digitalis to anyone here. My medicine case is locked at all times." He met Poirot's eyes, something fierce and raw beneath the surface. Larch pressed him, detailing the chemical traces. Grantham answered, "Anyone with access to my room could have taken the vial. There are no signs of forced entry, but my case was out for a moment while I spoke to Mrs. Castle this morning." Poirot made a mental note. Mrs. Castle, again at the periphery. Larch, convinced, moved to arrest the doctor, but Poirot intervened with a quiet, "No, Inspector, there is more to consider. The timeline does not suit. Dr. Grantham's letters were collected by the porter at precisely 9:30. A fact confirmed by the staff logbook." He turned to Grantham. "You say you never left your suite after that?" Grantham nodded. "Correct. I heard the commotion only when the maid screamed." Poirot turned to Larch. "And what of the sugar tongs? Why were they found by the fireplace far from the tea tray? A trivial detail, perhaps, but details, mon ami, often betray the careful liar." Larch hesitated, then shook his head. "It could have been moved during the struggle." Poirot shrugged. "Perhaps. But why, if the struggle was brief and the murder so calculated? And what of the missing page from de Vries's portfolio? What secrets did it contain, and who would benefit from its disappearance? Meanwhile, word of Grantham's impending arrest spread through the hotel. The guests reacted with a mixture of relief and suspicion. Sir Charles, quick to judge, declared the matter settled. Lady Miranda seemed unbothered, her eyes cold and far away. Evelyn appeared stricken, retreating to her room without supper. Miss Bray whispered nervously to Mrs. Devon, whose stony silence betrayed nothing. Poirot watched the shifting dynamics unconvinced. That night, while the corridors echoed with uneasy calm, he sat with his notebook, retracing every testimony, every movement. The facts did not align. The first false lead had played its part, but in Poirot's mind the truth remained a flicker at the edge of shadow, a pattern not yet revealed. As the clock chimed midnight, Poirot murmured to himself, "Misdirection, always. Let us see who profits from this convenient certainty." Chapter 7. The Psychological Game. The next morning dawned grey and wind stirred, the sea battering the cliffs beneath crystal sands in restless waves. Poirot, immaculate as ever, sat in the conservatory with a cup of chocolate and a notebook. The hotel felt suspended in time, its residents uncertain whether to cling to their routines or surrender to suspicion. Poirot summoned Lady Miranda first, requesting her presence with a note of almost flirtatious courtesy. She arrived, every gesture deliberate, her smile cool and practised. "Monsieur Poirot, how strange that murder sharpens the appetite for secrets," she said, taking the seat he indicated. He steered the conversation to her marriage, her acquaintance with De Vries, then, with a sudden shift, to her habits, the scent of lilac, her fondness for the east wing balcony. She blinked, a hint of surprise flickering. "Yes, I enjoy the sea air in the mornings. Is that unusual?" Her tone was playful, but Poirot watched the tension coil in her hands. He let the subject drift, circling to the stopped clock. "You are meticulous, madame. Did you ever notice anything odd about the Amethyst Suite's clock?" Miranda shook her head. "It has always worked perfectly, to my knowledge. Mrs. Castle takes great pride in such things." Poirot smiled, then let silence settle. Watching, always watching, until Miranda's composure became brittle. "Why these questions?" she asked, a flash of irritation surfacing. "Surely the doctor—" Poirot raised a hand. "Ah, but sometimes the obvious suspect is only a smokescreen. Merci, madame." She left, quickly, her poise visibly shaken. Next was Julian Standish. He swaggered in, but the bravado slipped when Poirot asked about his debts. "You are a man of imagination, Mr. Standish. Imagination, however, is not the same as truth. Did you owe money to Mr. De Vries?" Standish hesitated. I owed a small sum. De Vries was going to help me with an introduction in London, but I swear I hadn't seen him since last night." His voice wavered, defiance replaced by anxiety. Poirot watched him twist his cufflink nervously. "There is no shame in financial trouble, monsieur, only in dishonesty about it." Standish looked away, the mask cracking. "Miss—" Bray entered with trembling steps. Poirot questioned her gently about the upstairs landing, about what, or whom, she thought she saw. "It was just a shadow, I suppose," she whispered, eyes wide. "But I felt as if someone was watching, someone who wanted to frighten me away." Poirot pressed no further, noting how her glance darted toward the corridor every few seconds. Mrs. Devon, summoned next, bristled at Poirot's suggestion that not all was as it seemed among the guests. "I have seen enough in my life to know when people lie, Monsieur Poirot. I do not appreciate your insinuations." But even she could not mask a flicker of fear when Poirot remarked, almost in passing, that the missing page from De Vries' portfolio would reveal more than money. Evelyn Lytton was last, drawn and silent. Poirot regarded her with a gentle patience. "You seem very tired, mademoiselle. I wonder, did you sleep at all last night?" Evelyn shook her head. "I heard someone moving in the corridor. Twice, perhaps more. It kept me awake. I am afraid, Monsieur Poirot. I feel as if something terrible is still to come." Poirot leaned forward, his voice soft. "You are safe, mademoiselle. But fear is a powerful thing. It can blind us, or it can make us see the truth." When the interviews ended, Poirot's notebook brimmed with contradictions and evasions. In the silent aftermath, one truth emerged. The murderer was among them, and the mask was starting to slip. Chapter 8, A Secondary Mystery. The fragile order at Crystal Sands fractured again that afternoon, when the hotel's stillness was broken by the frantic shouts of Mrs. Castle. Poirot, deep in reflection by the window, heard her cries from the north corridor and hurried along with Inspector Larch to the source. Staff clustered in agitation near the Lytton family's private study, their faces pale. Mrs. Castle, keys jangling in her trembling hand, pointed to the open door. "It was locked, I swear it, Monsieur Poirot. I came with the tea tray and found it wide open, and look." She gestured inside, her voice barely steady. Poirot entered, noting at once the room's violated air. The desk drawers had been yanked open, their contents strewn across the Persian rug. An ornate box, Sir Charles's prized lockbox, gaped empty on the writing table. Papers, letters, a scattering of gemstones glinted among the debris, but the focus was clear. Someone had rifled the box with desperate haste. Sir Charles burst in, his face scarlet. "What in God's name? That box contained private papers, insurance documents, the Lytton family seal—" His voice cracked as he rummaged through the mess. "Gone! All gone!" Poirot's gaze swept the scene, eyes lingering on small disturbances. A single, muddy footprint marred the pale carpet, far too small for Sir Charles. Nearby, a faint scent of lilacs hung in the air, oddly out of place in the otherwise masculine study. Inspector Larch took statements as Poirot knelt by the lockbox. Its tumblers were clean, the mechanism forced not by brute strength, but with careful skill. On the desk's edge sat a half-burned match, faintly scented of sulphur, a detail Poirot tucked away. Lady Miranda entered next, pale but composed. "Charles, I was in the lounge. I saw no one enter or leave this room." Her eyes flicked to Poirot, and she stiffened at the sight of the footprint. Evelyn arrived moments later, shrinking from the chaos, her hands clasped tightly. "I was reading in my room. I heard nothing until Mrs. Castle screamed." Julian Standish, ever the dramatist, appeared in the hall, clutching a leather notebook. "Is nothing sacred here?" he muttered, more to himself than to anyone else. Miss Bray and Mrs. Devon soon joined, their faces anxious. "We were in the garden together," Mrs. Devon insisted, glancing at her companion. Miss Bray nodded quickly, but her voice wavered. "We didn't come inside until just now." As Larch questioned the guests, Poirot turned his attention to the window. It was unlatched, swinging slightly in the breeze. He peered outside and saw that beneath the ledge the ground was soft. A patch of trampled earth showed signs that someone had entered or exited here. No ladder, but the footprints matched the muddy impression on the study floor. Poirot directed Larch's attention to the missing items. The family seal, important documents, yet not a single jewel or banknote taken. This was not the work of a common thief. Sir Charles, his anger spent, now looked deeply worried. "Those papers, they pertain to my grandfather's estate, and the seal, without it, anyone could forge my hand." Poirot considered aloud. "We must ask, who benefits from this theft? Who needs these papers? And is it possible the murder and this new crime are not separate at all?" The atmosphere in the hotel turned electric. The guests eyed one another with renewed suspicion, old alliances wavering in the face of a second violation. Poirot watched carefully as nerves frayed further, certain he had seen the murderer's mind at work again, shifting the investigation's focus and muddying the waters with new deception. Outside, the sky threatened rain, the wind lashing the glass with a sudden gust. Poirot straightened, his little grey cells spinning. A second mystery had erupted, and with it, the the web of secrets at Crystal Sands grew dangerously tight. Chapter 9. Hidden connections. The theft in the Lytton study sent ripples of tension through Crystal Sands. That evening, Poirot gathered his thoughts by the drawing-room fire, letting the low hum of anxious conversation drift around him. Inspector Larch worked doggedly, retracing movements and questioning staff, but it was Poirot who quietly drew out the secrets woven beneath the surface. He began with Mrs. Castle, the housekeeper, whose composure had frayed to threads. "Mrs. Castle, your keys, do you ever—"
"Lend them? Was there a moment today when you left them unattended?" She shook her head, but her hands twisted her apron. "No, Monsieur Poirot, never. Only, well, once, when I was called to the kitchen and left them on the service table. It was just for a moment, I promise." Her eyes flicked nervously toward the cluster of staff, as if suspecting betrayal from within. Poirot turned next to Julian Standish, intercepting him on the stairs. "You seemed troubled in the study earlier, monsieur. Did you lose something of value?" Standish hesitated. "My notebook. I write ideas for plays, most of them nonsense, but someone's taken it." He lowered his voice. "I saw Evelyn near the study before the commotion. She looked ill. Maybe she found something that frightened her." Poirot let the accusation linger, then moved on to Evelyn herself, who sat hunched on the terrace, shawl tight around her shoulders. "Evelyn, did you enter the study today?" She shook her head, barely meeting his eyes. "No, sometimes I walk by, but I never go in. I heard voices. Miss Bray and Mrs. Devon, I think. They sounded as if they were arguing." Poirot nodded, remembering the uncertain alibis. Later, he found Miss Bray alone in the library, staring at a row of travel guides with unfocused eyes. "Miss Bray, your friendship with Mrs. Devon, it is long-standing, yes?" She swallowed. "We met years ago. She helped me once, after my father died. But lately, I feel as if she is keeping something from me. I saw her with Lady Miranda last night, whispering in the corridor." When Poirot sought out Mrs. Devon, she was in the lounge, arranging flowers with clipped precision. "I know what you are thinking, Monsieur Poirot. Lenora is fragile. She imagines things. If you want to solve this, look to the Lytton's affairs. There is more rot there than you suspect." Poirot, always gentle, inquired about her own relationship with de Vries. "We danced once at a charity event, nothing more. I found him clever but secretive. He was interested in genealogy, asked many questions about family history, especially the Lytton's Russian branch." Poirot's mind whirled. Hidden connections, old favours, unspoken debts. Every guest was linked to another by threads of fear, money, or desire. He considered the Lytton seal stolen from the study. To an outsider, meaningless. But to those with knowledge of the family's legacy, it could open doors or close them forever. After dinner, Poirot approached Lady Miranda as she sat at the piano, hands poised, but unmoving. "Madame, do you recognize this?" He produced a small envelope, its blue paper identical to the torn scrap found in de Vries' suite. Her face paled. "I may have seen it. It looks like de Vries' stationery. He asked me to deliver a note to Sir Charles, something about the diamond, but he seemed afraid." Poirot thanked her and watched as she quickly left the room. The guests drifted
to their quarters, the mood brittle with suspicion. Poirot sat alone, reviewing his notebook, the patterns becoming clearer. De Vries's interest in genealogy, the missing seal, Lady Miranda's secretive errands, Mrs. Devon's warnings, Standish's vanished notebook, Evelyn's hidden anxiety, all converged into a tangled knot of motives and grudges stretching back years. Somewhere in the weaving, Poirot sensed the key. A hidden connection, masked by new crimes and old wounds that would unlock the heart of the mystery. Outside, thunder rolled along the horizon. Poirot closed his notebook and smiled. He was closer now, though no one yet knew just how much he saw. Chapter 10. Poirot's Secret Clue. Night descended with an oppressive hush over Crystal Sands, the storm outside tapping against the windows as if impatient for secrets to surface. Poirot, his routine as meticulous as ever, retreated to his room, a small lamp casting long shadows as he arranged his observations. In the silence, he let the threads of deception and fear weave themselves anew. As he reviewed the day's interviews, one detail, seemingly trivial, clung to his mind. It was the footprint in Sir Charles's study. The print, muddied and small, stood out for more than its size. Its orientation, he realized, was wrong for anyone fleeing the scene. Poirot's gaze narrowed as he recalled the precise direction of the toes. They pointed inward, toward the room, not away from it. Someone had entered, not escaped. The matchstick, too, troubled him. Its scent of sulphur was faint but unmistakable, and yet no one in the house smoked matches. Poirot himself had witnessed only lighters in use all weekend. A match, burned and left behind, was a deliberate act. Poirot remembered Mrs. Castle mentioning a brief loss of her keys, coinciding with the timing of the break-in. That moment, barely a breath, was enough for a careful hand. Poirot considered the missing Lytton seal. With it, forged documents could be made, but who in the house possessed both motive and knowledge? His mind turned to genealogy, De Vries' curiosity about Russian ancestry, the family's estate, the cryptic conversations overheard between Mrs. Devon and Lady Miranda. Why did De Vries press these questions so urgently, and what had he discovered? Poirot's eyes wandered to the torn blue paper, identical to De Vries's note, but bearing only the phrase, "If anything should happen to me." It was a testament of fear, hastily abandoned. Poirot wondered if the rest of the message was destroyed or in someone else's possession. He reached for the envelope Lady Miranda had recognized. Her reaction had been genuine, but also evasive, perhaps more frightened than guilty. The patterns grew clearer. Poirot recalled Miss Bray's trembling account of seeing a shadow on the landing, and Standish's missing notebook, which vanished the same day as the break-in. The playwright's debts, Evelyn's nocturnal terrors, Mrs. Devon's veiled warnings, all signalled that the theft and the murder were tightly linked. At midnight, Poirot made his way quietly to the east wing, tracing the path from De Vries' suite to the study. The corridor was empty. He paused outside the amethyst suite, listening to the echo of the storm, then moved on to the study. Kneeling by the window, he examined the ground once more. The earth, softened by the day's rain, bore two sets of prints, one small and delicate, the other heavier. The smaller print matched the muddy mark from the study, perhaps a woman's shoe or a young person's. Poirot stood, his mind whirring. He pulled from his pocket a silk handkerchief and dusted the window latch. A faint, oily residue smeared the edge, unmistakably recent. Someone had used a thin implement to force the lock, not brute strength, but cunning. A noise behind him made Poirot turn. Evelyn, in her dressing gown, hovered at the door. "Monsieur Poirot? I heard voices. Is someone there?" Poirot's tone was gentle. "Only me, mademoiselle. Go back to bed. There is nothing to fear." Evelyn nodded, but her eyes lingered on the muddy floor, her shoulders tense. Poirot studied her for a moment before she slipped away, silent as a wraith. Alone again, Poirot pocketed the handkerchief, then took from the window-sill a single, fragile hair, golden, almost white. He studied it in the lamplight. It did not match Lady Miranda nor Evelyn, but rather Miss Bray's lighter locks. Poirot smiled, a gleam in his eye. He had found his secret clue. Not just a physical detail, but the answer to a question he'd been asking all day. Who in the house would risk everything to preserve a secret, one so old it was almost forgotten? He tucked the hair and handkerchief into his notebook. In the world of Crystal Sands, even the smallest things told stories. Poirot now held the key, one he would keep to himself until the right moment to expose the heart of the mystery arrived. Chapter 11. Tensions rise. The following morning it dawned sullen and grey. Breakfast at Crystal Sands was a strained affair. The usual pleasantries withered, replaced by sharp glances and whispered theories. Poirot, unruffled as ever, took his seat in the dining room, his watchful eyes missing nothing. The staff tiptoed, guests muttered, and every sound, the clink of porcelain, the scrape of a chair, felt amplified, charged. Sir Charles was the first to break the uneasy silence. "We cannot go on like this. We are prisoners in our own home." He glared at Inspector Larch, whose presence at the end of the table was a constant reminder of suspicion. "I demand you resolve this, Inspector. My reputation, my family, is at stake." Larch, maintaining his calm, replied, "With respect, Sir Charles, I require cooperation, not ultimatums. No one leaves until the matter is settled." Lady Miranda, seated rigidly beside her husband, pressed her napkin to her lips. "If only I could—"
"Remember something, anything useful. The strain is unbearable," Poirot interjected quietly. "Madame, sometimes it is not memory that reveals the truth, but what we notice in others." Julian Standish, eyes bloodshot from a sleepless night, scoffed. "We're all suspects, aren't we? Perhaps the next crime will be an accusation." His laughter was brittle, masking fear. Mrs. Devon fixed him with a cool stare. "Some of us have nothing to hide. Others," her gaze flicked to Miss Bray, "are less certain." Miss Bray flushed. "That's unfair, Ursula. I've told the truth. I never entered the study. I only saw someone on the landing, but I couldn't say who." Evelyn, silent until now, set her teacup down with trembling hands. I heard voices outside my door last night. I thought it was a dream, but now I'm not so sure." Her eyes sought Poirot, desperate for reassurance. Poirot regarded her gently. "Dreams and memories can be entwined, mademoiselle. Tell me, did you recognize the voices?" Evelyn shook her head. "One was a woman, I think. The other, low, angry. I was too frightened to leave my bed." The tension in the room thickened. Old alliances began to fray. Standish muttered, "Convenient, isn't it, that no one ever remembers clearly?" Mrs. Castle, pouring coffee, nearly dropped the pot. Poirot watched the interplay, noting how Mrs. Devon's composure cracked when the subject turned to last night. When asked where she had been, she answered too quickly, "In my room, reading." Yet Miss Bray glanced at her, uncertainty clouding her features. As the meal ended, Larch rose. "I will be re-examining rooms this morning. No one is to wander alone." The guests scattered, seeking safety in solitude or shallow alliances. Poirot strolled the grounds, observing how the storm had torn branches and left muddy trails, physical echoes of the internal havoc among the guests. Inside, alliances shifted. Lady Miranda and Mrs. Devon spoke in low tones near the staircase, their faces grave. Standish tried to corner Sir Charles, desperate to defend himself against rumour, only to be rebuffed. Evelyn lingered by the window, wringing her hands, her eyes distant. Poirot intercepted Mrs. Castle in the hallway, voice soft. "Madame, I must ask, do you trust everyone in this house?" Her answer was hesitant. "It's not my place to say, but there are things I have noticed. Lady Miranda receives letters from abroad. Sir Charles keeps his safe hidden.
The staff whisper, the guests plot. This place is not as peaceful as it appears. Poirot nodded. Thank you, madame. One last thing. Did you ever find your keys after losing them? She frowned. Yes. They were returned to my apron pocket while I was serving supper. I never saw who did it. As the morning wore on, suspicion turned to open accusations. Standish confronted Miss Bray in the lounge, raising his voice. If you see something, say it. This can't go on. Miss Bray shrank away near tears. Poirot stood in the doorway, silent but commanding. Misdirection, anger, and fear, they are the true enemies, mes amis. Until we face what is hidden, the truth will remain in darkness. That afternoon, the clouds thickened, and the air inside Crystal Sands vibrated with distrust. In the shifting alliances and sharp words, Poirot sensed the murderer's mask was slipping. The moment of revelation drew nearer. He could feel it with every heartbeat. Chapter 12. The Confrontation. A hush settled over Crystal Sands as the morning wore on. The storm outside had softened to a persistent drizzle, but inside, tempers raged hotter than ever. Poirot sensed the delicate balance of fear and pride shifting. A decisive moment was approaching. He summoned the principal guests to the drawing room, requesting Inspector Larch to join him. The doors were closed, the staff dismissed. Only the principal suspects remained: Sir Charles, Lady Miranda, Evelyn, Mrs. Devon, Miss Bray, Julian Standish, and Dr. Grantham. Poirot stood near the hearth, hands folded, eyes alight with a quiet, focused intensity. Mesdames et messieurs, he began, we have reached a point where the truth cannot remain hidden. I ask you now to recall not only what you saw, but what you felt, what you feared. In murder, it is not facts alone that betray the killer. It is the heart. The words rippled through the room, drawing nervous glances. Poirot addressed Sir Charles first. You insisted you and Lady Miranda never left each other's side the morning of the murder. Yet, Lady Miranda, you admitted to a solitary walk to clear your thoughts. Which is it? Sir Charles bristled. She was only gone a minute. That's hardly suspicious. Lady Miranda shot her husband a cold look. Charles, I told you I needed air. You were arguing with Dr. Grantham by the terrace. A murmur stirred as Dr. Grantham's face darkened. Sir Charles and I discussed the hospital's investment. We disagreed. That was all. His hand trembled slightly as he gripped his chair. Poirot nodded, then turned to Miss Bray. You claimed to see a shadow on the landing, mademoiselle. In moments of fear, our minds can play tricks, but you were clear. Someone was watching, yes? Miss Bray's voice was barely a whisper. Yes, monsieur, I saw the outline. A woman's shape, I think. She carried something small, glinting. I thought it was the key. Poirot fixed his gaze on Mrs. Devon. You have been forthright, madam, but not entirely honest. Miss Bray saw you and Lady Miranda speaking together late at night, exchanging something. Will you explain? Mrs. Devon's lips tightened. We are old friends. She confided in me about her fears. As for what we exchanged, it was a letter from De Vries. He asked Miranda to pass it to Sir Charles. She wanted my advice before doing so. Lady Miranda interjected quickly. It's true. De Vries wrote to me, asking for help. He feared for his safety, but wouldn't say why. I never gave the letter to Charles. I was frightened. The room stilled. Poirot allowed the silence to stretch, then addressed Julian Standish. Your notebook disappeared the same day as the study was ransacked. You implied Evelyn might have found it. Evelyn, did you? Evelyn looked up, startled. Her eyes brimmed with tears. No, Monsieur Poirot. I saw the notebook near the study door, but I was afraid to touch it. I heard footsteps and ran.
Poirot pressed gently. You are frightened, mademoiselle. But not by the murder, by what you know, perhaps. Evelyn hesitated, then shook her head. It's not what I know, it's what I remember. The night before Mr. de Vries died, I saw Mrs. Castle arguing with someone outside the study. I couldn't see their faces. Poirot's gaze narrowed. Merci, mademoiselle. He turned to Mrs. Castle, who had just entered with a tray, startled by the attention. You lost your keys briefly, yes? Mrs. Castle stammered. Only for a moment, sir. When I found them again, I thought nothing of it. Poirot addressed the group. In such a confined circle, nothing is truly lost, only misplaced, often by design. He paused, then with subtle force applied psychological pressure. One among you knows more than they admit. One has lied, not once, but many times. There are details only the murderer could know. I urge you now, for your own sake, speak before you are unmasked. The silence was thick. Poirot let it linger, the tension straining. He watched faces pale, hands clench, a bead of sweat tracing down Julian Standish's temple. Eyes darted, Lady Miranda's to Mrs. Devon, Sir Charles's to the window, Evelyn's to the floor. At last, a voice cracked. You don't understand, it whispered. But Poirot caught the tremor. Someone was near breaking. Poirot's little grey cells hummed with certainty. The trap was set. Now it was only a matter of time. Chapter 13. A desperate attempt to escape. The afternoon pressed on, heavy with gathering storm and the residue of Poirot's confrontation. In the corridors of Crystal Sands, the air was tinged with anxiety. Guests passed each other with eyes averted, as if to avoid not just suspicion, but the truth that had begun to seep from the cracks in their stories. Poirot retreated to the solarium, feigning relaxation with a cup of chocolate, but every sense was finely tuned. He knew from experience that the moment before confession often provoked something even more dangerous, a desperate attempt to escape. He was not disappointed. Near the cloakroom, Poirot heard a flurry of hurried footsteps, too hurried for leisure, too soft for a man. He set down his cup and stepped silently into the hallway, catching sight of Miss Lenora Bray, her face pale and lips pressed tight, clutching a small velvet pouch to her chest. She darted from shadow to shadow, eyes flicking over her shoulder. Poirot watched her slip through the staff corridor and into the rear service stairwell. Poirot did not follow immediately. Instead, he sought out Inspector Larch, who was engaged in fruitless questioning of Sir Charles. Quietly, Poirot relayed what he had seen. Larch, initially sceptical, agreed to investigate, and together they moved with purpose toward the back of the hotel, careful not to alert the other guests. As they reached the landing above the kitchens, a door banged open below. Miss Bray's footsteps clattered down the servants' stairs. Poirot and Larch exchanged a glance and hurried after her, pausing at the base of the stairwell just in time to hear the outer service door creak. Through the glass they saw Miss Bray, bareheaded, shivering in the drizzle, rush across the courtyard, heading not for the main drive, but toward the old gardener's shed at the property's edge. Poirot motioned for caution. She may not run far, but she will try to hide. Larch nodded grimly. Or destroy evidence. They advanced, careful not to be seen. The wind whipped at their coats, and the rain, now steady, pattered against the flagstones. The shed door was ajar. Inside, a weak beam of light danced across the dust and garden tools. Miss Bray, frantic, knelt by an old oil drum, struggling with trembling hands to pry open the pouch. Poirot entered first, his voice gentle but firm. "Mademoiselle, you have nothing to gain by destroying what you hold. Please, let us speak." She froze, breath ragged, then spun to face him, eyes wide and wild. I never meant—" Her words tangled, despair rising. Inspector Larch stepped forward, blocking the exit.
"Miss Bray, you must hand over whatever is in that pouch." Tears streamed down her face as she extended it. Poirot took it delicately, revealing its contents: the missing Lytton family seal, a set of old correspondence sealed with blue wax, and, most surprising, a small golden locket containing a faded photograph of a young woman with strikingly familiar features. Poirot's tone softened. "You tried to hide these, not because you are guilty of murder, but because you feared what they would reveal." Leonora nodded miserably. "My father, he worked for the Lyttons years ago in Russia. That woman," she gestured to the locket, "was my mother. When I found the seal, I thought, if anyone learned the truth, they'd think I was here to blackmail the family. I just wanted to protect myself. I never hurt Mr. de Vries, I swear it." Poirot inspected the correspondence. Some were letters from de Vries, others from an old solicitor in St. Petersburg. They hinted at disputed inheritance and buried family secrets, just enough to fan the flames of fear and jealousy among those who knew, but not nearly enough to prove blackmail or motive for murder. Poirot glanced at Larch, who gave a curt nod. Miss Bray would remain under watch, but the evidence told a more complicated story. As they escorted her back inside, Poirot noticed muddy smears on her shoes, matching the print in Sir Charles's study. But the direction, he reminded himself, still mattered. She had entered the study after the murder, not before. Back in the drawing-room, word of the incident spread like wildfire. Sir Charles demanded Miss Bray be arrested. Lady Miranda looked stricken, as if a mirror had been shattered. Mrs. Devon tried to comfort her friend, but her hand trembled on Leonora's shoulder. Julian Standish, ever theatrical, declared, "The plot thickens. Is anyone what they seem?" Poirot quieted the room with a raised hand. "The truth draws closer. We must look not at who ran, but who gained most from the chaos, and above all, whose secrets demanded a silencing so final." The storm raged anew outside, lashing the windows. Within Crystal Sands, desperation had driven one more suspect into the light, but Poirot knew the real killer was not yet unmasked. Chapter 14. The Final Piece. Falls into place night crept back over Crystal Sands, shrouding the hotel in a tapestry of shifting candlelight and long shadows. The aftermath of Leonora Bray's failed escape left the guests uneasy, fear whispering in every corridor. Poirot retreated to the music room, the storm's steady drumming on the windows, a low, ominous counterpoint to his thoughts. There, he arranged the contents of Leonora's velvet pouch on a side table: the Lytton family seal, de Vries's letters, the faded golden locket, and the fragments of blue stationery. Every clue, every secret, now lay exposed beneath the room's gilded chandelier. He studied each object with a jeweller's eye, letting their silent stories whisper in the back of his mind. A soft footstep at the threshold drew his attention. Evelyn lingered uncertainly, her face pale, eyes rimmed with sleeplessness. "Monsieur Poirot," she ventured, "may I speak with you?" Poirot gestured her in. "Of course, mademoiselle. You have carried a heavy burden. It is time to share it." Evelyn moved hesitantly to a chair. For a moment she stared at the locket, then covered her face with her hands. "It's not about the murder, not exactly, but I have lied. I saw more than I admitted the night Mr. de Vries died." Poirot waited, silent, coaxing the truth to surface. She continued in a trembling voice. "That night I was restless. I walked the corridor, hoping the sea air would calm me. I saw Mrs. Devon leaving the Amethyst suite. She carried something, a small blue envelope. She didn't see me. I heard voices inside the suite, angry, urgent, then silence. I ran away. I was afraid. Later, I saw Miss Bray on the landing, looking lost. When I returned to my room, I heard the sound of glass breaking." Poirot nodded, gratitude in his eyes. You have done well to speak now. It is fear, not guilt, that has troubled you." Evelyn's confession stirred something within Poirot's mind. He recalled the torn blue envelope matching De Vries' stationery found among Mrs. Devon's effects during the earlier search. A scrap of a letter hastily destroyed, bearing the warning, "If anything should happen to me." Poirot moved next to Mrs. Devon, who sat knitting in the lounge, her manner brisk. He questioned her gently about her presence in the amethyst suite. She bristled, then faltered. "I delivered the envelope, yes. De Vries asked me to leave it on his desk. I thought it was a trivial errand, nothing more." "Yet you destroyed the letter?" Poirot said softly. "Why?" Mrs. Devon's lips thinned. It would have hurt Lenora and Miranda as well. De Vries had found old records linking the Bray family to the Littons. Complicated inheritance business, nothing criminal. But secrets are dangerous in a place like this. With this final admission, Poirot began to see the mosaic more clearly. Every thread, each guest's deception, each stolen object, each desperate act, connected to that old wound, the inheritance, the blue diamond De Vries sought to verify, the forged papers, and the family seal. As midnight approached, Poirot returned to the study, gathering his evidence. The muddy footprints, the golden hair from the window latch, the blue wax seal, the torn note, all pieces in a puzzle whose outline now glimmered with unmistakable shape. Poirot summoned Inspector Larch and recounted the night's discoveries. "You see, mon ami, the murderer hoped to bury the truth beneath a storm of smaller secrets. Every theft, every lie was designed to confuse. But the method, always, it is the method that betrays. A killer who is calm but not cold, precise but desperate, one who stands to lose the most if the old Lytton secrets are revealed." Larch, still dogged but weary, glanced over the evidence. "You're saying the murder was not about the diamond or the seal at all, but about identity?" Poirot smiled. "It is always about identity in the end. What we conceal, what we protect, and what we fear will destroy us. The murderer knew De Vries would unravel the last knot, a truth so threatening that only murder could stop its telling." Before dawn, Poirot wrote a series of invitations, requesting all guests and staff to gather in the drawing-room. The moment for revelation had come, but he waited. Timing was crucial. He spent the last quiet hour before sunrise alone, staring out into the rain-lashed night, letting the final pattern settle in his mind. Soon, every face at Crystal Sands would be turned toward him. He would draw aside the last veil, and the truth, painful, elegant, and irrefutable, would at last stand in the light. Chapter 15. The Final Gathering. The storm had passed, leaving behind a sky that was lighter, though still shadowed. Crystal Sands seemed quieter than it had in days, as though the very walls were holding their breath. Poirot stood at the window of the drawing-room, his reflection barely visible in the glass, his thoughts carefully arranged like the pieces of a puzzle. The time had come. He could feel it in the air, thick with the electric tension of unspoken truths. One by one, the guests gathered in the room, their faces a mixture of anticipation and unease. Sir Charles Lytton entered first, his movements stiff, followed closely by Lady Miranda, who still carried an air of fragile composure. Evelyn, pale and withdrawn, sat near the fireplace, her hands clenched together. Mrs. Devon, ever the stoic figure, entered last, casting a wary glance at the others. Miss Bray, once nervous and now subdued, lingered by the door. Poirot studied each of them, noting the subtle shifts in their behaviour. It was clear. None of them were innocent, but none were as guilty as they believed themselves to be. They were trapped in a web of half-truths, secrets, and lies. His role was not just to expose the murderer, but to unravel the larger tapestry they had woven around themselves. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot began, his voice calm, measured. He stood at the center of the room, eyes sharp, surveying the group. "You are all aware of the crimes committed here. De Vries' murder, the theft, the lies. But what you do not know is the reason behind them, the heart of the matter, so to speak." A murmur ran through the guests. Poirot paused for a moment, letting the suspense settle. "I have spent my days observing you, listening to your words, noting the inconsistencies, the evasions. It has been clear from the very start that something far more complex than a mere murder has taken place. Something that ties you all together." He turned to Sir Charles, whose eyes narrowed. "You, monsieur, are the key to it all. The Lytton family's secrets, hidden for years, buried beneath the weight of wealth and power, are now at the surface. Your family's legacy, your holdings were all at risk of being exposed." Sir Charles's face flushed with anger. "I have done nothing wrong. This is absurd. My family has nothing to hide." Poirot remained unfazed. "You are mistaken, Sir Charles. It is not just your family's wealth that was at risk. It is the very identity of the Lyttons, the bloodline, the legacy, the connection to Russia. De Vries knew too much, and you, monsieur, did what was necessary to protect that legacy." Lady Miranda's face grew paler, her eyes flickering toward her husband. "Charles, what is he talking about?" Poirot ignored her question and turned his attention to Mrs. Devon. "And you, madame, you had your reasons for keeping the truth from your daughter. You were trying to protect her from a legacy of deceit. The Lytton family had ties to Russia, yes, but more importantly, you knew that the Lyttons weren't just wealthy. They were connected to something far darker. The truth would have ruined you, ruined everything you'd worked for." Mrs. Devon's eyes hardened, but she said nothing. Poirot's gaze moved to Miss Bray, who was trembling, her hands still clasped tightly together. "And you, mademoiselle, your father worked for the Lyttons in Russia. You knew, perhaps more than anyone, the implications of De Vries' research. The letters he had written to you, the secrets he uncovered. He wasn't just interested in your inheritance. He was interested in the Lyttons' history, the truth of their connections." Miss Bray gasped, a flicker of realization crossing her face. I didn't know what he meant. He never told me everything. I didn't want any part of it. I didn't want to be dragged into their mess." Poirot smiled faintly. "You didn't, mademoiselle, but you were already tied to it. We all are, in some way." His gaze shifted back to Evelyn, who had been quietly listening. "And you, mademoiselle, you knew nothing of this, but you were a pawn in the game, a pawn who, in her desperation, became an accomplice without even realizing it. The fear you felt, the things you saw, were not simply about the murder. They were about the truth being buried once and for all." Evelyn's eyes filled with tears, but she remained silent. Poirot finally turned to Dr. Grantham, who had been watching him intently. "And you, monsieur, you were the only one who could have known about the poison, who could have taken such a careful approach to murder. Your knowledge of toxins, of medicine, made you indispensable, but you were also the one who stood to lose the most should the Lytton family's secrets be exposed." Dr. Grantham stood abruptly, his face flushed with frustration. "I didn't kill him. I had no part in this." His voice cracked, but Poirot remained calm. "I do not believe you killed him, monsieur, but you played a part in the cover-up. You knew what De Vries had found, and you were complicit in ensuring that certain details stayed buried." The room fell into a tense silence. Poirot let the weight of his words settle in. Finally, he turned to face the group in its entirety. "And so we arrive at the final question. Who murdered Mr. de Vries?" His voice cut through the silence like a blade. "The murderer is someone who feared the truth, someone who had the most to lose, and that person is not who you think." Poirot paused, his eyes flickering over each of the guests, letting the moment stretch. He had seen their fears, their guilt, their desperation. Now the final truth was within reach. Chapter 16. The reveal. The silence in the drawing room was heavy, suffocating even, as Poirot's words hung in the air. The guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats, eyes darting nervously, each trying to make sense of what had just been said. Poirot had led them down a labyrinth of lies, falsehoods, and misdirection, but now, at long last, the moment had arrived. The final truth was within grasp. Poirot stood at the centre of the room, his posture composed, his eyes alight with quiet certainty. The guests stared at him, waiting, some in fear, others in defiance, but all of them desperate for resolution. They knew, as Poirot knew, that the time for games was over. Someone here had killed de Vries, and now the mask was about to slip. "Monsieur Poirot," said Charles Lytton's voice trembled, barely more than a whisper, "you can't be serious. I've done nothing at all, to deserve such accusations. Poirot held up a hand, silencing him. "Monsieur, please, let me finish. You have played your part, as have we all, but now we must return to the truth, the facts." He turned his gaze to the group, eyes scanning each face, lingering for just a moment longer on each one. "You see, I have not accused you all equally. I have only pointed out the complexities in your lives, your motives. But what I have not yet said is that you all have something in common." He paused for effect, letting the room wait. "You all fear the truth. And that fear led to the murder of Mr. de Vries." The air grew even heavier. Lady Miranda's hands tightened in her lap, her lips trembling. Mrs. Devon's eyes flickered nervously, as though she wanted to flee, but the room was too small, the walls too close. Poirot moved forward, his voice soft but firm. "The truth is simple. It is a matter of identity, a matter of bloodlines." He paused once more, letting the significance of his words sink in. The guests stared at him, bewildered. De Vries, as you all know, had discovered something so important that it threatened to destroy all of you. He had uncovered the hidden connections between your families, the Lyttons, the Brays, the Devon line. But there was something more, the inheritance. There was a shift in the room, a collective intake of breath. De Vries's investigation had led him to the realization that the Lytton family's wealth and legacy were tied to something far darker than anyone had imagined. Hidden documents, buried family secrets, and the legitimacy of Sir Charles's bloodline were at stake. The family had gone to great lengths to bury these truths, hiding their past, rewriting history to suit their own purposes. The Lytton family, Poirot continued, had strong connections to Russian aristocracy. But what you did not know, what de Vries uncovered, was that the Lytton fortune was built on the betrayal of another family, a family whose blood ran through the veins of someone here. He paused again, studying the faces before him. "Mrs. Devon," Poirot said, his voice quiet but unwavering. "You knew this truth. You knew that your family had a history with the Lyttons that no one else knew. You were the one who connected the past with the present. Your family, your ties to the Lyttons, were the foundation of de Vries's investigation. You saw the value of keeping this secret, and when de Vries threatened to expose it, you knew you had to act." Mrs. Devon's face was pale, the colour draining from her as she stood motionless. For a moment she did not speak. Then slowly her lips parted. "I didn't kill him," she said, her voice cracking with desperation. "But I knew what he was going to say. He had the documents, the truth about the Lytton's history. I didn't want my daughter to suffer because of it. I didn't want Lenora to be dragged into this mess. Poirot cut her off with a raised hand. "You didn't kill him, no, but you knew who did it." His eyes flicked to the back of the room, to the figure standing in the shadows, barely visible in the dim light. It was Lenora. Lenora Bray. The words hit the room like a thunderclap. Everyone turned, their gazes drawn to Miss Bray, who stood trembling, her hands shaking at her sides. She had been so quiet, so withdrawn throughout the investigation. But now, with the weight of Poirot's accusation, her composure shattered. "No," she gasped, her voice barely audible. I didn't mean to." Poirot stepped forward, his gaze unflinching. "You killed him, mademoiselle. You killed him because of the legacy he threatened to expose. You were not merely a witness to the Lytton family's secret, you were part of it. You were the key to everything, the daughter of a long-forgotten connection between the Brays and the Lyttons. And when De Vries threatened to reveal the truth about your heritage, you saw only one way to stop him." Lenora shook her head in disbelief, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I didn't mean to, I was so scared. I didn't want anyone to know. The letters, the locket, the seal, they were all part of the past I couldn't escape." Poirot's voice softened. "You did not want to be part of that past, mademoiselle. But you could not outrun it. The fear, the weight of the secret, drove you to murder." For a long moment, the room was silent, the weight of Poirot's words hanging in the air. Lenora Bray collapsed into a chair, sobbing uncontrollably. The guests, stunned into stillness, could only watch as the unravelling of the mystery drew to a close. Poirot looked around the room, his expression one of quiet satisfaction. "The truth is often more complicated than we think, but in the end, it is the simplest explanation that prevails. The murderer is always the one who has the most to lose." He turned to Inspector Larch. "The arrest should be made now, of course. The investigation is over." The guests stood in shocked silence, the room still heavy with the shock of revelation. For all their secrets, for all the lies they had told, it was the truth that had brought them down. And with that truth, the web of deception that had enshrouded Crystal Sands was finally unravelled. Chapter 17. Outcome and Justice. The rain had stopped, leaving behind a stillness that seemed to permeate every corner of Crystal Sands. The guests had been escorted to their rooms, the weight of Poirot's revelations still hanging in the air like a heavy fog. The sound of their footsteps as they retreated was soft, their movement stiff with the burden of what had just been uncovered. But amid the chaos of secrets and lies, there was one certainty that had remained constant: justice. Poirot sat in the drawing-room, his hands steepled in quiet contemplation. His sharp eyes, though relaxed, missed nothing. Inspector Larch stood across from him, reviewing his notes, the final details of the case already falling into place. The room was silent, except for the occasional rustle of paper, the soft ticking of the clock, and the distant sounds of the house settling after the storm. "I must admit, Poirot," Larch said, breaking the silence, "I didn't expect the resolution to come so swiftly. You've unmasked not just the murderer, but the entire web of deception." Poirot gave a slight nod. "It is often the case, Inspector, that the threads we believe to be separate are in fact connected. It is not always the grandest crime that is the most telling, but the small, seemingly insignificant pieces that form the bigger picture. Larch raised an eyebrow. But Miss Bray, Lenora, she didn't act alone. She was influenced, certainly, but she was still the one who carried out the deed. Do you believe she should be held solely responsible? Poirot's gaze softened, his voice quiet. Mademoiselle Bray was driven by fear, by the weight of a legacy she could not escape. But it was not just fear of exposure that led her to kill Mr. de Vries. It was the manipulation of others, the coercion of her mother, and the Littons, who maintained their hold over her life and the secrets of the family. Mrs. Devon, though complicit, acted out of love, a misguided love that sought to protect her daughter from the truth. Larch frowned. But love can be a dangerous thing, Poirot. It led to a murder, after all. She may have been afraid of what de Vries would uncover, but in the end, she chose to silence him. Poirot smiled faintly. Yes, Inspector, that is true, and yet it was not only fear that drove her. It was also the sense of ownership over a legacy that was not hers. De Vries threatened to expose the truth, the Littons' secret ties to Russia, the buried inheritance that had been passed down through generations. Mrs. Devon feared that her daughter would be caught in the wake of the scandal, just as the Littons feared the loss of their power and influence. All of them sought to protect themselves in the most desperate of ways. Larch shifted uncomfortably. So, you believe Lenora was a victim of her circumstances, but still responsible for her actions? Poirot nodded slowly. Yes, she was a victim, but that does not absolve her of her crime. Her fear led her to murder, and in the end, she must face the consequences of her actions. The sound of footsteps echoed in the hall outside. Poirot rose and moved to the window, his gaze resting on the distant horizon. The rain had ceased, but the air was still heavy with unspoken tension. The time for reflection was over. Justice had to be done. Within moments, Inspector Larch returned with the arresting officers who had secured Miss Bray in her room. She was pale, her face drawn with the weight of her confession, but she had not resisted. As the officers escorted her into the drawing-room, Poirot's heart ached with a sense of finality. The truth had been exposed, but it had come at a cost. "Lenora," Poirot said softly, "you have confessed to the crime, but you must now face the consequences of your actions. You may have been manipulated, but in the end, it was you who took the life of an innocent man. You must face the justice that has been earned." Lenora looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mix of fear and resignation. "I never meant for it to happen like this," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I was just trying to protect my mother, my family. I didn't know what else to do." Poirot sighed. "That is the tragedy of it all, Mademoiselle Bray. You were trying to protect something that was already broken, and in the end you destroyed more than you intended." Lenora's shoulders slumped, and for a moment Poirot saw the girl she had once been, lost, frightened, and desperate to escape a past she could not outrun. "You will face trial for your crime," Poirot continued. "But perhaps with time you may come to understand that justice is not just about punishment. It is about recognizing the consequences of our actions and making amends where possible." As the officers prepared to take Lenora away, Poirot turned to Larch. "Ensure that Miss Bray receives a fair trial. The truth is, she is not beyond redemption, but it is not my place to decide her fate. The law must take its course." Larch nodded grimly, understanding the weight of the decision. As the door closed behind Lenora and the officers, Poirot allowed himself a moment of quiet reflection. The case was over, de Vries's murder solved, the stolen seal recovered, and the tangled web of lies unravelled. Yet, in the silence that followed, Poirot could not shake the feeling that there was more to this story, something deeper than the crimes that had been committed. The guests at Crystal Sands had been irrevocably changed by the events that had unfolded. Some would find solace, others would find only regret. But for Poirot, the case was another reminder of the complexities of human nature. Justice had been served, but the scars of the past would remain for those who had lived through it. As he turned away from the window, Poirot murmured to himself, "The truth is always the key. It is just a matter of finding the right moment to unlock it." Chapter 18. The Closing Remark. The events at Crystal Sands had finally come to a close. The police had completed their investigation, and Lenora Bray had been taken into custody. The guests, now all but forgotten witnesses to a crime that had shaken their carefully constructed lives, had been given the opportunity to leave. Some had left quietly, their heads held high, while others lingered, their faces shadowed by the weight of what they had witnessed. The storm had passed, leaving behind a hushed calm that seemed to settle over the estate. Poirot sat by the drawing-room window, the evening sky now clear and sparkling with the remnants of the storm. The last of the guests had departed, the air now free of the tension that had hung thick for so long. In the silence that followed, Poirot allowed himself a moment to reflect. The case had been complicated, layered with deception, fear, and hidden motivations. Yet, in the end, the truth had come to light, as it always did. Inspector Larch, still weary but satisfied, entered the room. He nodded to Poirot, acknowledging the resolution of the case. "You were right, Poirot. The secrets they kept, the lies they told, they were all part of a much larger picture. De Vries' murder was just the beginning." Poirot looked up from his reflections, his sharp eyes still as perceptive as ever. "Yes, Inspector. But that is often the way. The smallest of acts, such as a missing letter, a stolen family seal, can unravel everything. The lies we tell to protect ourselves from the truth only serve to bury us deeper in the consequences." Larch walked over and sat across from Poirot, his posture more relaxed than before. "You mentioned the Litton's Russian connections, the inheritance, the family secrets. I still can't quite wrap my head around it all. How did you piece it together?" Poirot smiled faintly. "It was not the first time I encountered such a situation, Inspector. Families are often bound by the weight of secrets. They hide them, bury them, and in doing so they trap themselves. I merely followed the path of those secrets. The key was always in the connections, the family ties, the inheritance, and the fear of exposure." Larch nodded thoughtfully. "And Miss Bray, Lenora, do you think she'll ever find peace?" Poirot's expression softened, and for a brief moment there was a sadness in his eyes. "I believe she will find peace only when she fully understands the consequences of her actions. She did not kill Mr. de Vries out of malice or greed. She did so out of fear, a fear that had been cultivated over years of lies and manipulation. She was not the only one to suffer because of that fear, but she must face the truth of what she did, and in doing so, perhaps she will find the closure she seeks." Larch leaned back in his chair, a heavy silence filling the room. The weight of the case had settled into his bones, and the realization that justice had been served, while comforting, left him with an unsettled feeling. There were no true winners in this story, only the reluctant acceptance of a painful truth. Poirot, ever perceptive, seemed to sense the shift in Larch's mood. "You see, Inspector," he said, breaking the silence, "the hardest part of solving a mystery is not finding the truth. It is accepting it. Everyone in this room has been affected by the events that transpired. But it is the truth that will allow them to move forward. Larch's eyes met Poirot's, and for the first time since the case began, he saw a flicker of understanding in the detective's gaze. It wasn't just about solving the case, it was about the emotional toll it took on everyone involved. The truth had a way of changing people, shaping their futures in ways they never expected. Poirot rose from his chair and walked to the window, looking out over the now quiet grounds of Crystal Sands. The estate, once a place of peace and grandeur, now seemed like a shell, a place that had witnessed both the dark depths of human nature and the light of resolution. "As you said, Inspector," Poirot continued, his voice softening, "the Lytton's secrets were the key. But it was not just their secret, it was everyone's secret. In the end, it was the fear of those secrets that led to murder, that led to betrayal." Larch stood, joining Poirot at the window. "Do you think they'll ever truly escape it?" Poirot's eyes lingered on the horizon, his gaze distant. Escape is an illusion. The truth always finds a way to resurface. It is a force far more powerful than any lie, and it has a way of shaping the future of those who try to bury it. The two men stood in silence for a long moment, the weight of their conversation settling over them like a heavy cloak. Poirot knew that the resolution of the case had brought no real satisfaction. Justice had been served, but the damage had been done. The scars of Crystal Sands would remain long after the guests had left. Poirot turned from the window and fixed his gaze on Larch. "In time, they will find peace, Inspector. But for now, we must move on. The case is closed, the truth has been uncovered, and justice has been done." Larch nodded, his expression resolute. "You're right. It's over." Poirot smiled, his eyes gleaming with the quiet satisfaction of a job well done. "Indeed it is. But remember, Inspector, that justice is not always swift, and truth is not always easy, but it is always worth the pursuit." As the two men left the drawing-room, the last remnants of the storm cleared, leaving behind a calm that seemed to promise the possibility of new beginnings. But Poirot knew better. The truth had a way of finding those who least expected it, and its lessons were never easily learned. Chapter 19. The Last Echo. The storm had passed, and with it the storm within Crystal Sands. The guests were gone, their lives affected forever by the events that had unfolded. The estate stood in a hushed, uneasy calm, as if even the house was waiting for the final resolution to settle in. Poirot sat by the fireplace, the warmth of the fire contrasting the cold silence of the room. Inspector Larch, having seen the last of the guests off, returned to join him. His face, usually so resolute, showed signs of exhaustion and reflection. "You've solved it, Poirot," Larch said quietly, staring into the fire. "But do you ever feel like justice isn't truly justice?" Poirot's gaze was steady, his voice soft but firm. "What is justice, Inspector? It is not merely the law that dictates our actions, but our conscience. The law may punish, but it is the truth that shapes us." Larch frowned, processing the words. "Lenora, she confessed. But do you think she'll ever truly find peace?" Poirot studied the fire, the flames dancing as if reflecting the complexities of human nature. "Peace is a difficult thing to find, Inspector. It is not simply about punishment. It is about understanding, accepting, and confronting the truth. Lenora is still a victim of the fear that controlled her life, fear of exposure, fear of what her family had kept hidden. But she is also guilty. Justice, in her case, is not about vengeance, but about facing what she has done." Larch nodded slowly. "So you think she'll always carry the burden of what she did?" Poirot smiled faintly, his gaze drifting. The burden of the truth is a weight few can bear. But in the end, it is the truth that frees us. Lenora may carry that weight, but only in confronting it can she ever hope to understand herself. Larch sighed, stepping closer to the window. I don't know if I can ever fully understand it. The way people can be shaped by their past, by secrets. Poirot joined him at the window, his eyes thoughtful. The past is always with us, Inspector. It shapes us even when we deny it. But it is not the past that defines us. It is how we face it, how we deal with the consequences, that truly shapes who we are. They both stood in silence for a moment, the room quiet, except for the crackling of the fire. Poirot's thoughts turned to the complexity of the case, the manipulation, the fear, the tangled lives of those involved. It was never just about murder. It was about the people, the choices they made, and the lives they sought to protect or destroy. Finally, Larch turned to Poirot. So, what now? The case is closed. Lenora will be tried, but what happens next? Poirot looked at Larch with a mixture of understanding and quiet resolution. The next step is hers to take. She will face the consequences of her actions, but how she carries them, how she chooses to live with them, is what will truly matter. Justice has been done, but the journey to understanding herself will be far longer. Larch gave a slow nod, finally beginning to comprehend the weight of Poirot's words. He turned to face him completely. You've seen it all, haven't you? Poirot smiled, a slight twinkle in his eye. I have seen enough, Inspector, but the greatest mysteries are not those we solve. It is the mysteries of the heart that we never fully understand. Larch chuckled, the weight of the case lifting slightly. I suppose you're right, Poirot, and maybe, just maybe, that's the hardest part of all. Poirot nodded, his expression thoughtful. Indeed, Inspector. But that is the true nature of life, is it not? We are forever in search of truth, and yet the answers often lie within ourselves. The fire crackled one last time as the two men stood in quiet contemplation, knowing that while the case was closed, the ripples of the truth would continue to echo for some time to come.